How y'all doing? First time back in a really long time. I'm not sure how to do this, but we have been away for 11 or 12 days at this point. And in my absence, this channel kind of blew up, which is kind of cool. We are edging very close to 10,000 subscribers. I would very much appreciate if you would help us in that mission. And we're back. Feels good. Feels good to be back. So, a lot has happened since we last spoke. Anthony Edwards is taking over the NBA. That's been kind of cool to watch. There's a lot of trends that have been emerging. Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby are headed for a collision course. There are a lot of people who have gone home, sadly gone to Cancun. One person who's in Cancun right now is Scotty Barnes. We will talk about Scotty Barnes. We will talk about Anthony Edwards and his ascent to superstardom. Is he the future face of the league, and why are we in such a rush to name him the face of the league? He had a great game tonight. He's been on a heater. And quite frankly, I'm not really sure how the Denver Nuggets are supposed to stop him. But we need to talk about why we've been so reluctant to call Giannis Antetokounmpo or Luka Doncic or Nikola Jokic the face of the league for a very long time. This is going to be a pretty structured live. There's going to be this thing right here, which will keep us on track so that we don't completely lose our minds. We're going to talk about a lot of things. So first, we're going to talk about Anthony Edwards. We're going to talk about how good Denver is and whether or not they're vulnerable. We will definitely talk about the coaches who have been fired and who are probably going to be fired very soon. Darvin Ham, of course, let go by the Los Angeles Lakers. I think it was pretty well deserved. Frank Vogel, not my favorite coach, but a guy who knows what he's doing. And a lot of people have come to his defense saying, hey, the Phoenix Suns, not his problem. It's Matt Ishbia's problem. It's James Jones's problem. I think it is his problem. And I think coaching plays a really big part in how teams navigate. One coach who, frankly, didn't really keep his composure very well and frankly got outcoached was Nick Nurse. And is there a little bit of Schadenfreude there? I wasn't a very big Nick Nurse fan on his way out. So watching him and Joel Embiid together suffer was kind of, vindication. It just sucks for me that Jeff Dowden and Kyle Lowry happened to be on that team. Tyrese Maxey, also a guy that I think showed a lot. But the Knicks move on, and they are setting up for what is going to be a for sure Eastern Conference Finals. I don't think the Pacers have a chance in hell, and we will talk about that for sure. We will talk about karma being a bitch. There are a lot of people who've done a lot of shady, stupid things, and frankly, most of them are going home right now. So we're going to talk about our comeuppance. I wish we could create a comeuppance award. Like you did something shady, and now you're going to Cancun. We could talk about that, but from Joel Embiid to Patrick Beverley, there's a lot of people. The Los Angeles Clippers and everything they did to recruit Kawhi somewhat illegally. Yeah, things are not working out. We'll talk about the Dallas Mavericks and what has been honestly some of the most inspiring basketball in Kyrie Irving's life. And frankly, I don't think enough people give Kyrie Irving his due as, frankly, one of the most talented players in NBA history. He is the closest thing this league currently has to Kobe Bryant, and I think he is just incredible. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what the Mavericks need to do. We will talk about, the Indiana Pacers. Certainly a valiant effort in the first round against a very beat up Milwaukee team, right? Just totally, decimated by injuries, aging. They weren't very good to begin with, and then to make matters worse, they lose Dame. They had barely half of Dame for most of the series. They had no Giannis. They had no shot. And the fact that this wasn't a sweep is worrying to me. We'll definitely talk about, team types, how you want to construct a team. There is a team type that we are seeing do very well in the NBA, and that is the New York Knicks and the Minnesota Timberwolves, which is the one guard, all defenders lineup with some, offensive skill sets around them and whatever. Obviously, Karl Anthony Towns and OG Anunoby and Josh Hart, these guys are not scrubs, but obviously, you have an offensive engine. There's sort of a heliocentrism to how the Mavericks operate. There's also a heliocentrism to how a lot of these teams operate, and they've sort of defined themselves by having an offensive initiator surrounded by a whole bunch of screeners, defenders, off-ball action, etc. So we're going to talk about team types, like the various team types. Of course, we're looking at a team type that has not worked very well in recent memory, which is the overloaded stars who ISO 55 times a game type, which is really difficult for people to understand how three players as talented as Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant are not in the second round right now. It's probably really hard for people to understand why Kawhi Leonard lost both his games that he played when the Clippers were fully healthy with Kawhi, PG, James Harden, Russell Westbrook. Those are a lot of big names. Those are all guys who at one point or another have been considered one of the top three players in the NBA. But one point or another is the point. So we're going to talk about how in the new CBA, you really can't build teams like that, and how maybe the Raptors, in their infinite wisdom at times, might be doing things a better way. We will talk about the face of the NBA, certainly, what I talked about earlier, and, why we've been sort of reluctant to call Nikola Jokic the face of the NBA, even though he's been the best player in the NBA for years. Why we are somewhat reluctant to call Joel Embiid the face of the NBA, even though he is probably, at times been in consideration for the best player in the league. Why are we so reluctant? Or is it because they're big? Is it because they're not American? We can definitely talk about that. And if they are not, the face of the league, when's the next time an NBA player who is American is actually going to win MVP? Because the last one was James Harden. We're going to talk about playoff physics. What players are doing well and what players are not doing so well. And, what are we seeing as a trend, and why that bodes really well for Scotty Barnes and, RJ Barrett. We are going to talk about, hold on. We are definitely going to talk about whether or not the Raptors want this pick. We're going to talk about whether the Raptors defense is dead. A lot of people certainly are talking about how the Toronto Raptors don't have a shot next year. They don't have any defenders, et cetera, et cetera. I think they do have defenders. We're going to talk about what type of player the Raptors will definitely look at this offseason. Hint, hint, it's not this guy. I don't think it's this guy. I really don't. If they do sign him, I'll be very surprised. There's been a lot of talk recently about, taking on Ben Simmons, Andrew Wiggins, James Wiseman. Oh, man, you do not build up culture to destroy culture. It just doesn't make sense. So if culture is a priority, and what about Zach Edey and Bronny James? Have I changed my tune on these two guys that I considered very, very hyped prospects that frankly did not fit the Raptors' needs? Is a little bit of film study making me change my mind about taking the swing on these guys later in the draft? With Bronny, more like as an undrafted free agent, and with Zach Edey, maybe with that second round pick. Would I be open to taking on a guy like Zach Edey? Let's see. We'll talk about it. And what else? It's just all black screen from here. That's going to be our last thing. So let's talk about it. First of all, how you guys been? How have you been in this hiatus? I have certainly been well. I think the last time we talked, I was talking about collecting N64 games. That continued for 9 more days and accelerated into complete madness. And we'll talk about that at the very end of the live. Haramis saying, no way Bronny goes through with the draft. He needs at least another year in college. Never know, man. Never know. He has LeBron James as a dad. So the rules that apply to an average college player do not really apply to him. They could have a different idea of how to develop him. And just because you think that the traditional logic is that you develop through, college, I disagree, actually. I think you develop much better in the pros. Rob came back from the dead like the Undertaker. I do love the wrestling reference. Yeah, I just dug up a whole bunch of my wrestling action figures. That was kind of cool. Okay, what's up? Long time indeed. All right, let's talk about it. So Anthony Edwards goes berserk, right? 43 points. I think he was dominant. I think the most underrated part of Anthony Edwards and what he has been most impressive with is, I mean, there's a few things. Number one is the shot making and the pull up jump shot, which just wasn't that great during the regular season. I think he had some lapses. I think he showed a little bit of immaturity at times this year. He certainly felt to me like I got into a fight with someone on Twitter, I think 6, 7 months ago, talking about Bradley Beal versus, no, wait, was it Bradley Beal? No, it was Devin Booker versus Anthony Edwards and Devin Booker versus Donovan Mitchell. And really, I took Anthony Edwards and Donovan Mitchell over Devin Booker, and people thought I was crazy. And yeah, there's a reason why, because Anthony Edwards is a very strong player, right? Jose Calderon saying, y'all seen MJ play tonight. Honestly, it was very MJ-esque. Reggie Miller had to hold himself from saying, that is Michael Jordan because he played against him. But man, he is he gets to his spots. It's that simple. When it comes to basketball, I got to tell you, it's just that simple. And really, whether you're talking about Jokic, whether you're talking about Anthony Edwards, whether you're talking about Kawhi Leonard, whether you're talking about Paolo Banchero to a very lesser degree because he does not process the game very well right now, but eventually, if his basketball IQ ever catches up, whether you're talking about Shaquille O'Neal, Hakeem Olajuwon, Michael Jordan, like go down the league history of playoff performers, guys who do really, really well in the playoffs, and find me a guy who does not get to his spots well through one way or another, whether it be skill, Kyrie Irving, whether it be strength, Luka Doncic, right? Everyone talks about playoff Luka. Yeah. Like, I mean, we as Raptor fans watch Kawhi Leonard decimate a team full of stars in the Philadelphia 76ers, partially because he just got to his spots. That's it. Once you get to your spot, that's really, getting it off clean, right? Tariq saying, do you think Tyrese Halliburton is overrated? No, I actually think he was getting a little bit overrated earlier. I think right now he's probably very underrated. There's a lot of people talking about him like he's a scrub. He's not a scrub, but those injuries can be really tough to come back from. So I will give it some time. I think he is a very smart player. I think he is he's a very compromised defender. So if they want to be good around him, they're going to need a lot more defensive stuff. But they have it. They have it, really. I mean, between Aaron Nesmith, they have a lot of talent. Jarris Walker, Andrew Nembhard, they have a very bright future. I think the Indiana Pacers have a very bright future. All the more troubling and somewhat confusing that they parse so much of it out for Pascal Siakam. I think had they waited a little bit, right? Do they have, like, hypothetically right now, do they have the package that it would take to get Kevin Durant to Indiana? Do they have, like, there's going to be stars that are going to be available, right? There's a lot of teams that very much underperformed the first round, and the CBA is no joke, right? So you start thinking, did they have, like, between that Bruce Brown contract, the boatload of draft picks, Benedict Mathurin, are you telling me if the Phoenix Suns decide to blow that thing up, they're going to get a better offer than that for Kevin Durant? And honestly, at this point, do I want Kevin Durant from age 36 to 39 next to Tyrese Halliburton and a whole bunch of young players, Miles Turner, etc., Andrew Nembhard, Aaron Nesmith, etc.? Do I want to give myself that 3-year window and just the marquee and, prestige that comes with having Kevin Durant in the East, by the way? Or do I want Pascal Siakam from age 30 to 34? I'm sorry, this is a pretty easy argument for me. Like, Kevin Durant in that offense would be unstoppable. So I'm not sure that they could necessarily get him. I'm not sure KD's going to be shopped, but I really think, anyways, I still wish we could have had Jarris Walker in that trade. I agree. In other news, Leafs out, choked the chokers. Shoot, that sucks. Bummer. Okay, the Leafs lose. Fuck. So game 7, Leafs overtime lose. That That adds up. Okay. So in terms of, what went right and what went wrong, I mean, the Minnesota Timberwolves just came out in this game and punched the Denver Nuggets in the face, right? Like absolutely just gut punch to the face. It was extremely daunting how much they put Jamal Murray in jail, really. They have lengthy defenders all over the place. They have size inside. They have size on the perimeter. They have great point of attack defense. They have Rudy Gobert cleaning up everything. And, need I say, how quickly the perception changes. When that group, when they made that insane trade, and I still think that you can make an argument that it was probably a little bit of an overpay for Rudy Gobert, who was coming off a disastrous playoffs, and a lot of people thought he was washed and overpaid, etc. And he had a pretty bad year last year, and a lot of people got to say, hey, like you could have had Walker Kessler, you could have kept all this stuff and whatever, and Danny Ainge swept them and whatever, but look at what you have right now, right? This is the type of move that you make when you think that you've got an ace in the hole, right? Because when you have an ace in the hole, like an Anthony Edwards, when you have that player, that engine that drives playoff success, then your job as a general manager is just to support, accelerate, and I want to say lengthen the window that you have of contention. Newsflash, the Minnesota Timberwolves can win a championship this year. It's not likely they will. It is, however, very possible they could. Like if you told me this team beats Boston, I fully see that happening. I could see that happening. It probably will happen. They're a very good team. They have the size and they have the flexibility, and they have, if Anthony Edwards is really this good, if he continues to be this good, they can beat anybody. There's really nobody they can't beat. So, okay, let's take that at face value. There's nobody they can't beat. They're a very good team. Why are they a good team? They're a good team because they have depth. They have shot making. They have relief. They have playmaking. They have interior defense. And they have point of attack defense. They literally satisfy every single box. They check every box of what it takes to be playoff successful. The only question coming in was, would they be able to generate enough offense? And Anthony Edwards is pretty much single-handedly answering that question by being one of the top 5 players in the playoffs so far. Not ready to say he was the best player in the playoffs, but he's been pretty damn close. So yeah, this team is legit. And they were tonight. Denver does come back. They did get some answers. They start setting some screens. Jokic starts setting some screens, but man, Jokic has not shot the ball well from 3 this year. And tonight he did not shoot the ball well at all. He had a ton of turnovers. He looked frustrated. There's a lot of help here, and he doesn't have a lot of help, right? And then, of course, Naz Reid goes nuts in the 4th. I mean, that dude, he did not start out well. He had a crazy turnover, just like brain fart, throws the ball into the other team, sparks a fast break, almost cost them like momentum completely. And then he just, that final stint with him, it was really tough. When you've got this type of, package coming off the bench, you got Naz Reid. Naz Reid, for context, I believe will be the best center on the Raptors right now. He's their third guy. Their third big, right? I think Karl-Anthony Towns got off to a brilliant start, really provided, some balance to their offensive attack when Anthony Edwards didn't have it going, but there wasn't a lot of stuff that Anthony Edwards didn't have going. He got a little bit gassed, right? And maybe he overextended himself to start because he was amped up, right? He's going up against the world champions. But one thing I knew coming into this game, and I really fully picked the Minnesota Timberwolves to win game 1, because I don't think the Denver Nuggets really played well against the Lakers in round 1. I think the Lakers played all right. I think the Denver Nuggets beat them. But I think in so many times, like the Lakers beat themselves. They had depth concerns. They had some lineup issues. I think there's a pretty good reason why Darvin Ham got fired. But I don't think the Denver Nuggets convincingly showed me that they were the best team in the league. I don't think Boston really showed me they were the best team in the league. I think the 2 teams that really impressed me most in the first round, the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Minnesota Timberwolves, because they stood on business. They did not play around with their food. They did not make it interesting. They just stomped on teams. And I think that's what you should do in the first round, because you never know. So I think they were really, really good. and tonight was no different. They had a ton of balance to their defensive attack. They had Anthony Edwards checking Jamal Murray one on one. He just put him in jail. Then they had Jalen McDaniels on him. Karl Anthony Towns did a great job. He has done a great job historically on Nikola Jokic. In fact, it was interesting that, when we talk about perceptions, Karl Anthony Towns is a terrible defender. Perception, right? Because he doesn't switch well, and he's not very, laterally flexible on the perimeter. And Rudy Gobert is, probably going to win Defensive Player of the Year. But it comes down to matchups. Sometimes guys just don't match up well. Karl Anthony Towns is a big dude. He's very, very heavy, and he's a very solid base guy. And he just, for whatever reason, and he's very long. He's like 7'4" wingspan. He does a great job on Jokic. Like, for whatever reason, he does a great job on Jokic. And the thing about having Cat on Jokic as his primary defender, especially when Jokic's jump shot isn't falling, is that Jokic doesn't have a lot of room to score on him other than to take him in the post, right? Because if Jokic's three is not going, and tonight he was 2 for 9 from three with 7 turnovers, like, that's unacceptable. Like, he did not have a double-double. Like, what are we talking about here? Jokic gets 15 rebounds in his sleep. Like, they kept him off the glass. They did a lot of crazy. They worked hard, man. They worked really hard to get this win. They basically stole. They stole this game, right? They stole home court advantage. I expect this to be a long series. I expect this to go at least 6 or 7 games. I don't expect it to be a sweep. But if at the end of it, Minnesota is on top, do not be surprised at all, because they very well could be, and I wouldn't be surprised at all. Okay, let's move on to our next point. Tariq saying Jamal Murray is a superstar in the playoffs. That lines up perfectly to what we want to talk about next. Jamal Murray has not been a superstar so far. I mean, he hit 2 very, very big game winners, and his shot making has been awesome, but his defense has not been awesome, and his overall production throughout the entire game, I don't think has been great so far. Look, a lot of what happened for the Nuggets in the beginning of this season, in the beginning of this game, where the Minnesota Timberwolves got off to such a quick start, was a lot of Jamal Murray, right? Like, defensively, it was a lot of Jamal Murray, and like, capably, we've seen Michael Porter Jr. be capable defensively, but in a lot of ways, the Denver Nuggets are an anomaly. In terms of championship contenders, they simply do not have the personnel to be great defensively. And while you can make an argument that they have 2 very good plus defenders in their lineup in Aaron Gordon and KCP, and they have defensive energy coming off the bench in Peyton Watson, they don't have enough defensively to win that battle every night, right? And so, to some extent, you do have to ask yourself, like, is this a perennial title contender? Like, I understand Jokic is the best player in the world. I get that. I fully believe that. I've believed it for a long time. He's great. But this supporting cast, like, is Jamal Murray, in your opinion, on the level of an Anthony Davis? As a second star, is he on the level of a like, in a lot of ways, the Boston Celtics are very atypical as well. Like, the most typical championship contender right now is probably Dallas, because they have those 2 guys, like those top 2 dogs, Luka and Kyrie, those guys who can get separation, get to their spot, put, and in these tight 88, 92 kind of games, that guy who can step up and get to his spot is great. And Jamal Murray has been that guy to pair with Jokic. Last year, this is the first time Denver is trailing in a series in 2 years. However, there is a limit to how far he's going to be able to go, considering his health and considering the matchup on the other end. There is so much size and length. You're not going up against Austin Reeves, Dennis Schroeder. You're not going up against these guys. You're going up against, like, Anthony Edwards and freaking Jaden McDaniels. Like, this is not like Nickeil Alexander-Walker. There's no break. Defensively, that team is solid. So, look, enough about the Denver Nuggets. I think the Denver Nuggets are a title contender. I do not think they are the title contender. I think there are 3 legit title contenders in the West. I think there's 1 legit title contender in the East. Could there be a second title contender in the East? Yes. I'm going to find it very, very hard to believe that the New York Knicks can upset the Boston Celtics. However, if there is a team that can do it, it's them in the East. They are so big, so strong. I was so impressed with the Knicks. Granted, like as much as I'd love to say Nick Nurse just choked that series and whatever, we'll definitely talk about that. Quickly touching on Darvin Ham's dismissal, Frank Vogel being out. There's a lot of talks about Frank Vogel potentially losing the locker room, right? In Phoenix, Shams basically had that entire report fired up. The second the Suns got eliminated, there was a lot of, talk about how guys didn't respect him. Guys found him, kind of irritating. There was some condescension. I believe Devin Booker had a quote where he said, he's really proud of his scouting work or something along those lines. I remember it. And I got to say, I'm not a really big fan of either of these coaches. And I fully understand that there's some segment of the media that feels like players are being coddled, coaches are being, put to pasture and, being used as scapegoats to basically shield. And there's Charles Barkley, he addressed it on TNT, NBA TNT, their show, and where he said, it's the players' fault. It's all the players' faults, and it's not on the coaches. Frank Vogel is not at fault. Darvin Ham not at fault. This guy's not at fault. How do I put this? When you are the coach, buy-in is your responsibility. It has to be. I understand that is not your fault alone. It is your responsibility. Fault and responsibility are not the same thing. It is your responsibility to make sure the guys are optimized. It is your responsibility to make sure that things are opened up and communicated. Now, if you're going to tell me that Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker just don't give up and care about winning, and they don't care about basketball, and they just tune Frank Vogel out, and there's nothing poor Frank could have done, I don't believe you. I don't believe you because I think I know enough about those 3 guys to say they do care about basketball. They're just not a young, impressionable team, and you're going to have to really prove your shit when you're coaching players like LeBron and KD. Like those guys have been around, right? They're older than some of the coaches in the NBA. So getting buy-in from those guys is going to be difficult unless you know your shit. And, I look at a guy like Darko Rajakovic in Toronto and how he got buy-in. It was not automatic. He did not get buy-in from Pascal Siakam at all. You know how many times Pascal Siakam really just went outside what, he was specifically assigned to do? It's tough. But how you react to that is going to determine whether or not you get buy-in from the rest of the guys. Then eventually that guy leaves, and now that guy's gone, and you have to deal with the guys who are there. And, again, I think over some period of time, NBA athletes, NBA players are pretty good judges of talent and pretty good judges of, character. For the most part, they understand if you know what you're doing, if you're about what you're about. And while there may be exceptions to this, where I think certain guys maybe have gotten fired, and you can make a case for their X's and O's attributes and say, oh, they shouldn't have gotten fired. Maybe Adrian Griffin shouldn't have gotten fired. Maybe David Blatt shouldn't have gotten fired. Maybe there's a lot of guys in the league, but there's enough to be said about those guys, and specifically a lot of guys who've been fired, where you can make a case that had they figured out how to connect with their players a little bit better, they might have had a different outcome. And again, Ty Lue, right? Ty Lue, very successful coach, right? Back to back, right? He has coached very big personalities. Why has he been successful? Ime Udoka, back to back playoffs, situations where playoffs were the goal. In Boston, he goes all the way with them to the finals. Now in Houston, he's really led to a huge turnaround. Why is there so much buy-in with Ime Udoka? He's about what he's about. Tariq, you got Cavs or Magic Game 7? I got Cavs. I've been very impressed by the Magic, by the way. Very impressed. I I love Franz Wagner, man. And Jalen Suggs is making a believer out of me. And I love these stories about pivoting on players. Like I talked a lot of shit about Jalen Suggs as a rookie, a lot because I thought he was very overrated, and I really didn't want the Raptors to draft him. And I thought he was terrible. He was actually objectively, he was probably the worst player in the league as a rookie. He was awful. I think it's a good example of, writing people off too early. And I think a lot of people who were very high on him were high on him for the wrong reasons. They saw him as, Alonzo Ball type. He's definitely more of a Drew Holiday type. And he may never quite amount to that. Maybe it'll be more of a Marcus Smart. But man, he's valuable. He's contagious. His energy is contagious. So he's been really good. But overall, my final take on this is these coaches deserve what they're getting. And while that may not always be the case, and I do think sometimes, we side with players a little bit too much. There's an immediate knee-jerk thing from management, especially, to fire the coach because it just, placates everything and it makes everyone feel like, oh, we're making changes. And then, you hire a guy and then he does the same thing as the other guy and you fire him too. And there's some element of, at what point is it management? At what point is it stars? At what point is it accountability, etc.? But I do believe the job of any coach is to connect with their players and get buy-in. Darko Rajakovic turned this entire team that was not naturally unselfish into very unselfish guys. And he changed the culture. And he did that one step at a time, one relationship at a time. Mark Daigneault did not have, some serious NBA player experience or whatever, but shit, he got complete buy-in for that entire Thunder team, and they fight for him. Chris Finch, right, in Minnesota, right? Mike Malone. Like you're seeing countless examples of guys who have just gotten complete buy-in. And when you listen to those guys talk, you kind of understand why NBA athletes would fuck with those guys. Does that make sense? So that's not to say Darvin Ham isn't like the type of guy you'd want to grab a beer with, but when he was hired, he was extremely unproven. And you just don't hire a guy like that because he's the opposite of Frank Vogel, right? There is a middle ground between Frank Vogel and Darvin Ham. Where do these teams go from here? I don't know, but I'm assuming, quickly, karma is a bitch. Yeah, Patrick Beverley talked a lot of shit about Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby not being dogs. Well, guess what? Those guys are going to the second round, and Patrick Beverley is not. Karma is a bitch. Nick Nurse, he talked about wanting to coach a championship contender. Well, he got bounced by OG Anunoby and the New York Knicks in the first round. His star is going home. His star, who is reckless, ridiculous, and frankly, I respect Joel Embiid, the basketball player, but I cannot respect Joel Embiid, the person, because of how immature and how ridiculous and how reckless and how dangerous some of his actions have been on the court. Not only, injuring Scotty Barnes 2-3 years ago in the playoffs, but also countless others. I can create an entire new highlight with just this playoff series alone that he had against the Knicks. He was ridiculous. The number of times this asshole flails his hand, whips people in the face, dives into people's knees. God knows, he's injured Danny Green. He's injured so many players. And honestly, if it's deliberate, it's ridiculous. If it's not deliberate, it's still ridiculous. If it's clumsiness, it's still ridiculous. So I'm just, not a fan. There's a lot of other players where karma is a bitch, and there's an organization that I would like to say karma is a bitch, and that's the LA Clippers. They mortgaged the house, frankly. Actually, let's continue on with the karma is a bitch thing. Milwaukee Bucks, karma is a bitch. Y'all fired your first year head coach to make a change, right? You traded Drew Holiday, who's an NBA champion, wanted to be there for whatever reason, traded him to Boston, no notice, right? No communication, no forewarning, nothing. Traded him for Damian Lillard, who didn't want to be there. Y'all going home. The LA Clippers scouted Kawhi Leonard, extorted, basically, they got extorted by the Oklahoma City Thunder. They paid up Shai Gilgeous-Alexander multiple draft picks, and now Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is going to the second round, but the LA Clippers are not. And I think that's hilarious. And Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is an MVP finalist, and Kawhi Leonard and Paul George are not. So I think that is hilarious. And if I was Steve Ballmer, I would realize that karma is a bitch. And, there's an ethics to this, right? I don't think it was ethical sending Lawrence Frank to Raptors games and sending Clippers executives to Raptors games. And the way that some of those teams have just gone about building their organizations through very cutthroat methods, through some unethical methods. I think a lot of those teams are home right now. So, yeah, bit of a karma is a bitch reminder. Moving on to our next point, Mavs have a shot. I mentioned it earlier. I won't take too long on this. I've been very impressed by Kyrie Irving, and Luka Doncic has not played well at all, and they still look like a team that can win a championship. I wonder if Maxi Kleber is going to be okay for this round. They'll need him, right, against OKC. I think both teams showed a lot. So this will be like the Western Conference basically is the place to be when it comes to playoff series. Mavs OKC is going to be box office. Luka versus Shea, like, wow, right? Like Kyrie versus Jalen Williams, Kyrie versus Shea. Like, this is going to be crazy. Really excited to see what more Chet Holmgren can do. The Mavs do have some size inside, right? They have Daniel Gafford. They have Derek Lively. Rest in peace to Derek Lively's mother. But, they have some athletes. They match up pretty well. On the other hand, of course, the OKC Thunder were the number one seed for a reason, and I do think they have a shot. I just think the Mavericks have a better shot. And while both teams are very impressive in the first round, I do think the Mavericks come out of this. And when they come out of this, once they come out of this, they'll be going up against either Denver or Minnesota. And I think they have a chance against either one of those teams as well. Although I do believe, weirdly enough, they probably have a better shot against Denver. By Indiana. I'm willing to say before this series even starts, before I watch a single minute of this series, that the New York Knicks are advancing to the third round, to the conference finals. And that's going to be really cool because, it brings me shades of the last time the Knicks, advanced to the finals. And they did so with Marcus Camby stepping in, right, for the injured Patrick Ewing. And it was a ragtag group of defensive guys. And this Knicks team, is making a believer out of me. I think OG Anunoby has been awesome for them. Josh Hart, if he can continue to shoot the way he's been shooting, if Jalen Brunson can even, Jalen Brunson is going to have a much easier time scoring against Tyrese Halliburton and this hapless Indiana team than he did against, the Philadelphia 76ers and Nick Nurse and his crazy scheming defense, right? So, Indiana had a hard time closing out the Milwaukee Bucks without Giannis and Dame. They're going to get mollywopped by this bigger, athletic, physical team. And I think OG Anunoby is going to prove my point about Pascal Siakam being not a superstar star player. I realized that he got off to this very historic start, first two games against Milwaukee, and everyone was talking about, oh my God, no one has scored this many points since Will Chamberlain. And, a lot of people DM me on stuff, and I get it. I'm very happy for Pascal Siakam, but let me be clear. He's not a superstar. He's not a star. Like, he's not like he's barely an all-star. This is not worth $50 million a year. I have no idea why Raptor fans are doing some victory lap, talking about like how Masai is crazy for trading him. No, crazy for trading him so late. Crazy for getting so little back for him, yes, but not crazy for trading him at all. But that being said, I remain open to the idea that maybe Pascal Siakam has changed. Maybe he will evolve. He's a very hard worker. Maybe there are some playoff demons he's exercised. And if he shows up in a big way against New York, I will take back a lot of what I've said about him. Because if he can dominate, if he can be if he can be 90% of what he was in round one, and let me just be clear, across, all games, he was decent. Not great. He started out great, ended kind of flat. So if he can be 90% of that against the New York Knicks, I'll change my mind. That's a very impressive team. It's not like he hasn't been good in the playoffs before. He had a pretty competitive series the last time the Raptors faced off against the Sixers. And now he doesn't even have to be the guy. He has a guy who is better than him in Tyrese Halliburton who can feed him the basketball. The problem is Tyrese Halliburton just hasn't been himself either. So I'm curious to see how that's going to, work. I'm curious to see how the Knicks will guard him, right? Like who is going to get the primary assignment? I'm assuming it's going to be OG Anunoby. He's so familiar with him. He knows him so well. And I just don't think like if I could think of like I always said it like at some point if the Raptors traded OG and Pascal, like the worst matchup in the league for Pascal is OG. Like he's so bad for him. I think guys like Jaden McDaniels, OG Anunoby, Herb Jones, I think these guys are just big enough, strong enough, and quick enough to stay with Pascal. Um, and a lot of the times when he was, getting like I think one of the things that people don't realize, like in the first round, is like, yo, Bobby Portis went at him like hard, right? That was Bobby Portis, right? So, like, what's he gonna do inside with Isaiah Hartenstein and Mitchell Robinson? Like those guys are gonna one hook, turn, boom, like it's done. His post defense has fallen off a cliff. And let me be clear. Um, Real stars, it's not about 30 points, it's not about 20 points, it's not about any of that. It's about shifting defense. It's about getting to your spot and shifting defense. Can you shift the defense? When Pascal Siakam went into the post, count how many times the Milwaukee Bucks decided to double him. Just count. I mean, I was watching, like I can't tell you to watch every single game, every single minute and studied it or whatever, but the games that I did watch between that Milwaukee and Indiana series, it was my least watched series of the first round. Apart from Heat, I was focused more on the Western Conference, but how many times did I see Pascal Siakam one-on-one against Bobby Portis or Brook Lopez? They just went, okay, one-on-one. We'll live with it. And how many times did I see Bobby Portis in the post against Siakam and the Pacers are sending a double team? So Portis is doing more. You know what I mean? Like, that's important to me. It's important that my star draw a second defender when he's isolated one-on-one against a weak defender. So yeah, I think and that's the crazy thing. It's like the Knicks don't have to send a double team on Pascal Siakam at all. They have very capable defenders, and it'll be interesting to see how Miles Turner fares because I think he was great in the first round. Moving on, team types. Yes, there's a lot has been made about this Allen Iverson type. This team, the Allen Iverson, Eric Snow, Aaron McKee, Dikembe Mutombo, that team that went to the finals, and it was just like Jumaine Jones, if y'all remember that guy. It's just a whole bunch of really scrappy defenders around this one guy who took a ton of shots. And I think there are a lot of other teams that have kind of mimicked that. The New York Knicks right now, Julius Randle's out. Jalen Brunson is kind of like that guy. Luka Doncic in years past has been kind of like that guy, the heliocentric hub, and a whole bunch of defenders around him, Tim Hardaway Jr., etc. We're seeing Anthony Edwards and the Minnesota Timberwolves emerging as that type. So it got me thinking about like team types and like what team type do I really, really like? What team type do I really prefer? There's like always like I think I really prefer the Boston Celtics team type, which is like a team with a capable, offensive talent, but like relentless depth and versatility, right? The Celtics can play through Jaylen Brown. They can play through Jason Tatum. They can play through Drew Holiday. They can play through Kristaps Porzingis in the post. They can play Kristaps Porzingis in the high post. They can play him in the low post. They can play him, as a stretch big. They can spread out 5 out. They can go, two bigs with Kristaps and Al Horford. They are just malleable. They're flexible, and I really like those teams a lot. The Spurs were kind of like that team latter, stages of Tim Duncan's career. The 2014 Spurs, when Duncan had sort of moved off of being like the top player in the league or a top 4 player in the league, and he was more like a top 15 guy. And then you had, Tony Parker, who was like a top 20 guy, and Manu Ginobili was like a top 20 guy, and Kawhi was like a top 25 guy. Like that team just they got you through depth, right? Hold on one second here. Excuse me. I have not talked this much in almost 2 weeks, so I'm losing my voice a little bit right now. So Yeah, like I like that player type. There's of course another, team type, which is the big three, right? Um, that team type is hard because you do have to synergize the strengths of those three players, right? And I think that's been very fashionable, right? Since LeBron, since KG, Paul George, sorry, KG, Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, LeBron, D Wade, Chris Bosh, like that big three model. So obviously, teams just keep trying it with Kevin Durant. We've seen Kevin Durant be part of several big threes. First in we saw him be a part of, like, look at the big threes that KD has been a part of. KD's been part of the Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Kevin Durant, that big three in OKC. Then he moved on to becoming a big three with um, Steph and Clay, if you will, or Steph and Draymond, whichever way you want to sort that out. He was a big three there in a sense. It was never considered really a big three, but there was a big three there. Then he went to Brooklyn. He was kind of a big three there with himself, James Harden, Kyrie Irving. And then now you have this big three with KD, where it's KD, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal. And I think like the Golden State version was the one that made the most sense, right? The the OKC one made some sense as well. I'm not really sure the Brooklyn Nets and the Phoenix Suns have made a ton of sense, especially in terms of how KD is being used. But I think there's a bigger discussion to be had about whether that player, what what needs to work? What needs to work around those guys to make something like that work? You know, like is it just how well do those three guys fit? Or is it who's your fourth guy and how bad is your fifth guy, sixth guy, seventh guy? You know what I mean? Like is it used to work and now it doesn't work anymore because the league has just become more sophisticated and you like look at what happened to Milwaukee Bucks when Damian Lillard went to the bench. Like it was like a 7-0 run, like 40 seconds, right? So how how much can you get away with? Can you have a Samaki Walker on the floor anymore? Do you know what I mean? Can you have a Eric Montross on the floor anymore? Can you have a guy who's just not giving you enough offensively? Can you have a Tyler Hansborough, right? Can you have a defensive liability on the floor anymore without getting completely blitzed? I'm not sure. So when I look at teams like the Boston Celtics that have the multitude of ways they can go and their top 7 edge of their roster, and you can consider the you can definitely consider the Minnesota Timberwolves in this line as well if you think about it because of their depth with Nas Reed, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Kyle Anderson off the bench. Like they have a very flat group. Like Anthony Edwards is emerging as head and shoulders above Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert now. But I think you can make an argument to start this year that there was like not a clear separation on who their best player was. Like when you consider Rudy Gobert's immense defensive impact, and yeah, you could say Anthony Edwards is their face, their franchise, he's their future franchise player, et cetera, but he's ascending now. And I think, when you look at teams that have won championships or won, dynasties or whatever, the Spurs, the Celtics of, the 80s, the Bulls in the 90s, et cetera. When you look at those teams, there was a lot of depth, a lot of role players, and just a lot of pieces that made a lot of sense. Two-way guys. So I think the Raptors, for everything they're doing, are doing things the right way. The only question will be whether their pieces are good enough to be those pieces. Okay, let's move on. I don't necessarily know if my team types commentary was as sophisticated as I would have wanted it to be. Maybe that deserves its own video. There's been a reluctance in the NBA to anoint Nikola Jokic or Luka Doncic or Giannis Antetokounmpo or Joel Embiid the face of the league. There's a reluctance to name Shai Gilgeous-Alexander the face of the league. Why? What is it about these guys that is so inherently unmarketable? Is it the way they play? Look at the faces of the league, right? We go Magic Bird, right? Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Kobe Bryant. Tim Duncan was never the face of the league. Kevin Garnett was never really the face of the league, but you could make a case that he was considered the best player in the league for like a year, maybe. Dirk Nowitzki was an MVP, but he was never the face of the league. Hakeem Olajuwon, Shaquille O'Neal was never the face of the league, which is a little bit weird. So there's a case to be made that almost every single player who's been a face of the league has been a perimeter player. It's been a long time since the face of the league was like 7 feet tall. But if that's the case, well, Luka is a very exciting, very marketable, extremely outspoken, very good, extremely accomplished, totally on track to be a top 15 player of all time type of guy. Why is he not the face of the league? Why was he not the face? I mean, my God, why? What's wrong with him? You know? Steph Curry. We forgot about Steph Curry. Tariq. Uh Shaq was the face of. I don't really think Shaq was the face of the league, but tomato tomato. I don't really feel like he was. I feel like he was on some video games. That's true. He was on NBA 2K6. Allen Iverson was the face of the league for a bit. See, again, like it's like short pockets, right? But like when I think of face of the league, I think LeBron, Kobe, right? It's been perimeter guys, it's been wing guys, and even LeBron was not ever fully embraced the way Michael was embraced. So I think there is some elements of you probably. I mean, they tried to make Ja the face of the league. I think that is true. I think Derrick Rose, there was some momentum there for Derrick Rose to become the face of the league, right? So I want to come through with like a face of the league checklist. Like what helps and what doesn't help. I think it helps to be a guard or a wing player. Okay. So that's a bit of a notch against Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic. And I think that's partially because the average person is not 7 feet tall. The average person is about 5'8", 5'9", 5'10", etc., and have a lot more in common with Steph Curry than Nikola Jokic. I get that. It's easier for an average person, an average adult male in the United States, which is predominantly the market that the NBA cares most about, to identify with the play style and physique of Steph Curry or Kobe Bryant. I get that. Or an Allen Iverson. Anytime there's a small guy, there's always a push, right? So we'll say that being a perimeter player is going to be helpful. I'll say that being exciting is helpful. Vince Carter was a name that I kind of left off this list because I think for a little while there, he was to face the NBA. When you talked about the NBA basketball, you talked about Vince Carter. Very exciting player, very exciting player, jaw dropping, exciting. So I think that's a notch in the belt for an Anthony Edwards. So there's an exciting, never know what you're going to see type of thing. And that's probably why guys like Derrick Rose, John Morant, Zion Williamson, etc. have been pushed. And maybe this is a case you could make for why guys like Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, guys like this haven't been pushed because they don't necessarily embody some of the prototypical ideas that we hold as fans about athleticism. Okay. It probably helps to be North American because every single player who's been the face of the league ever has been American. I don't want to say North American because Shea is North American. No, American born, American raised, American Team USA, etc. Makes sense. It's not necessarily xenophobic. I say it's not necessarily xenophobic. It could be xenophobic. It could be misconstrued or construed as xenophobic. I think low-hanging fruit for people to just say, okay, well, they hate on these guys because they're foreigners. They hated on Dirk. They hated on this guy, that guy, whatever. I think Jokic is very well liked. Not fully appreciated, not fully embraced, not fully understood, but liked. I don't think most people that I talk to hate Nikola Jokic. I think people are much more split on Joel Embiid. I think most people like Luka Doncic. They find him a little annoying and maybe a little immature, and frankly, so do I. But I think most people like him. I think most people would rock his jersey. I think he's popular. But yeah, I think it helps that you can fly a little and that, the average American can identify with you. And again, I think it just comes down to identification, right? But then if it comes down to identification, then why is it that high-flying athletes, because most people can't do 360 dunks like Michael Jordan and Vince Carter. So why is it that they were more popular than a guy like Reggie Miller or Allen Houston? You know what I mean? Guys who were not super high flyers. So why is athleticism even a thing? So I think it's just, I think it comes down to who you talk about the most is who you think is the most important. Who you think is the most important is who you associate with the thing, right? If you want my honest opinion, I think the face of basketball in the United States right now is Caitlin Clark. I haven't checked the WNBA schedule, but here's a fun bet. Hold on, let me actually check the WNBA schedule. When does the WNBA season start? I'm telling you, man, because a lot of people think this shit is just going to die out because, the preseason has already started. Okay. So WNBA preseason has started. The season starts on, holy shit. So the Indiana Fever, their first game is May 14th. Wow. Okay. So the NBA is going to get intense, I tell you, intense ratings issues because people are going to tune in to WNBA. Bet money, man. A lot of people, myself included, thought that maybe this Caitlin Clark thing would just die out after, college. It won't. I can see it. I can see it in how much those, the Indiana Fever tickets cost. They are expensive as hell. I can see it in the ratings. I'm telling you, man, like the WNBA is going to be a real threat to ratings for NBA playoffs. I mean, the game's at 8:00. I guarantee you, there's a playoff game that night. You know what I mean? Like you got the Liberty, the Storm, the Aces. Like that's some really good teams with some really big stars, and people are tuning into women's hoops. So it's great for the growth of basketball. I'm very curious to see how the NBA is going to deal with this, though. Anyways, so yeah, moving on. Who do I think is going to be the face of the league? Honestly, look, if it was me, obviously, I love Scotty Barnes. I think Scotty would be a great ambassador for the league, but I think some part of being the face of the league also has to do with some other stuff that I didn't talk about, which is the market you play in, the success of your team, consistently. Everything I've described so far, I think there's an aesthetic element, not only to how your game looks, like, is it pretty? Is your game pretty? Is it smooth? Kind of like, is it Anthony Edwards, right? Is it exciting? But also like you as a human being, do you look like the face of the league? Do you look like the type of guy that women want to, watch? I think that matters too. I think that's helped certain guys in the past. So all of that being said, it seems pretty obvious to me that the league will try to push Anthony Edwards as the face of the league, and he's playing like he deserves it. But that all being said, they have tried this with Zion. They have tried this with Zion. They have tried this with Ja. And now they've tried this with Derrick Rose. They've tried this with a lot of guys. I'm telling you that the success rate on guys who rely on athleticism as much as Anthony Edwards does, and I'm not saying he's not skilled, because he's very skilled and he works very hard. But his primary, mode of success right now is burst, speed, strength. Strength's not going anywhere. He's 22 years old and he is phenomenally strong. But that burst in athleticism, if faced with an injury, because he is not big per se, he's like 6'4". He's a 6'4" guard in a league where 6'4" is undersized to be a guard. So my best bet for the next 10, 15 years, if there's a stock, if these players are a stock, I take Wembanyama 20 times out of 20. Beyond that, I think Luka's a pretty safe bet too, to age very gracefully. I think Jokic is going to be really good for the next little while. I think Scotty's going to be great. I really do. I think he's going to be very, very good. I mean, I think Anthony Edwards is probably going to be pushed as a face of the league for a little while. I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander will probably, I think there's a very good case to be made that Shai will have a better career than Anthony Edwards. But, there's also a case to be made that Anthony Edwards, 3 years, 4 years younger, is a better player than Shai was at that age. He's definitely a better player than Shai was. So who's to say? Anyways, it will take work to get there. He's definitely not there yet, but, through 8 five playoff games so far. He has played extremely well. And he is looking every bit like a person who deserves to be the face of the league. Moving on quickly, the playoff physics. Look, man, Paolo Banchero, right? Shaquille O'Neal, Michael Jordan, Anthony Edwards, like over and over and over and over. I'm seeing guys who have playoff success. I'm not even saying Paolo has been very successful because he's been a turnover machine, but he's doing a lot of stuff that maybe, if you're one of his detractors or someone who is a little bit doubtful about how someone so young would navigate their first playoffs, he's had some success partially because he's just able to get to his spots. And I can't help but watch some of these players who are succeeding in the playoffs and not think to myself, Scotty Barnes is going to be great in the playoffs. And I think it just comes down to the physics of getting to your spots and what you do once you get to that spot. So are you a good jump shooter? Are you a good pull-up jump shooter? Do you have a high release point? Are you able to get separation through, your lower body, through your footwork? I think Scotty is like one of the most open players I've ever seen in the league. When I say that, I mean, I almost never see his shooting pocket bothered, ever. Like, he is such a massive player. He's so smart. Now, I can't tell you what is going to happen when he gets triple teamed and whatever, but I'll tell you he's probably going to pass. And he's a very good and capable passer and gifted passer out of that. But I think that there is such a rare blend cocktail with him. You haven't really seen a player like this. And I think when he gets to the playoffs, he's going to enjoy a lot of the same benefits that Jokic and Anthony Edwards are, which is that, and Kawhi Leonard has enjoyed, which is that he gets to his spots clean. He gets to his spots clean. And once that jump shot, becomes more muscle memory and automatic, guys like him and guys like RJ Barrett, right, who have that physicality advantage where they are just able to bulldoze guys, and they're just physically not very finesse players. They're more like grit and grind type of like beat you up physically type of players. I think they are going to have a quite a bit of success in the playoffs. Personally, I think both of them are going to have a lot of success, and I think the Raptors might be a lot closer to playoff success than most people think. Raptors defense, is it dead? Do the Raptors have bad defenders like across the board? I mean, I'm seeing Scotty Barnes, Jakob Poeltl, Kelly Olynyk, Emmanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett. All of these guys have, for the most part, either been themselves really good defenders or have been on like key parts of really good defensive teams. It's not like you have Trae Young and Luka Doncic on your team, right? There is no complete turnstile defensively on your team. So why is it that we assume that the Raptors are so bad defensively, that this big weakness is defense, they're never going to be able to defend, et cetera, et cetera? Well, is it because they lost OG Anunoby, who is an incredible defender? I think that's part of it, sure. Is it because they lost Nick Nurse because he is a really good defensive coach? He is, and they did. And, maybe that's part of it. Certainly not because they lost Pascal Siakam, I'll tell you that. But even without Jakob Poeltl, when they were playing Cam Birch, they were a pretty competent defensive team. I think it comes down to the fact that Darko simply did not really coach defense very well this year. And it's not even like a flaw or, a criticism of him. I think he wasn't trying to. I think like once Jakob Poeltl went down and Scotty Barnes went down, there was just sort of like a fuck the defense, try to work on the offense, implement the offense. And I think the offense is sophisticated enough, and the offensive development that the Raptors needed to do was sophisticated enough that it was good enough to devote a half season to it. And knowing damn well that if you devote half a season to offense or the entire season to offense and don't really work on your defense and don't really integrate defensive sets and schemes and have like a general defensive philosophy that is going to be successful on most nights, I think the Raptors really didn't have one. I think on most nights you're going to lose. And I think that was by design. So I think that now that the offense is a little bit more clicking, I do think the Raptors will be a much, much better defensive team, even if they don't change a hell of a lot of their personnel. So, yeah, I think it's going to be better. Do we want this pick? Oh, man, I've been thinking about this. There's a little bit of an underrated pro and con about this. So, on the one hand, if you get this pick, it's probably very likely going to be a top 4 pick, right? If you keep it, because the odds of staying at 6, I do not need to keep saying this. The odds of going at 6 are lower than this pick going to the Spurs, like way lower. So, The odds of keeping this pick are lower than the Spurs getting this pick. The Spurs walk into draft lottery night with better odds of getting the Raptors pick than the Raptors have of keeping their own pick. I think that is clear. The math is clear on that. However, if the Raptors do get a top 4 pick in this draft, right, it will probably be, a welcome thing for the fan base. It will be like a phew, thank God, we escaped death, right? But who do you think is worthy of a top 4 pick in this draft? The more I watch the players in this draft, I mean, every player that I could think of as the 4th player or the 3rd player in this draft strikes me as more of a 10th to 14th type of player in most drafts. And I've talked about this many times that this draft is a lot of depth and it's just not a very strong draft. Like at the very, very top, there is like that lack of Derrick Rose, John Morant. There's like that, typically when you have a top 4 pick, you're like franchise cornerstone. You know what I mean? That's what you're batting for. It doesn't always work. James Wiseman, Marvin Bagley, etc. But yeah, like when I look at these guys, I think in the best case scenario, these guys are going to be 1 to 2 time All-Stars. I don't see all NBA upside with these guys. Now, I could be wrong. Anthony Edwards, the number 1 overall pick in a quote unquote weak draft. I get it. It was not this week, though. And I do think that there is another benefit to the Raptors not getting this pick that I'll present. If the Raptors don't get this pick, most likely they save like $9 million this year, right? That $9 million, when you have cap space, is valuable. When you don't have cap space, when you're over the cap, it's not as valuable. When you're operating as an above the Raptors will not have. There's a couple of rare opportunities for the Toronto Raptors right now. Sorry for those of you who are not Toronto Raptors fans. So just shifting my focus a little bit more over to Toronto Raptors talk. It's very rare that a team has cap space. Now, most Raptor fans can't get excited about cap space because they think of it as, well, nobody wants to come to Toronto, right? And people, don't want to come to Toronto because of, stupid shit like what Rudy Gay said, which is not really worth addressing. But if you want to know what I think of it, go check out Instagram. I released a reel about it. It's not worth talking about. Rudy Gay is ridiculous. That being said, there are multiple uses for draft for cap space. I mean, look at what the OKC Thunder have done, right? I mean, a lot of people think they just drafted well. No, man, they took on terrible contracts. They bought out guys. They sat guys out. They tanked properly. So the Toronto Raptors have like a couple of doors here. Door number 1, you get this pick. You pick a guy, you pay him $9-10 million a year as a player who in most drafts probably goes 10th, 12th. And you hope he's really good. You hope he's a starter long term. Best case scenario, you hope he's as good as Michael Porter Jr. Right? You hope he's as good as Jamal Murray, maybe. I mean, that would be like you would be hitting the ball out of the park. Neither of those guys have ever made an all-star team. They're both on max contracts, but neither of them have ever made an all-star team, right? So there's a clear lack of that talent. So when you have this draft space, cap space, what you could do hypothetically is one of two things. You can do the Bruce Brown thing. By the Bruce Brown thing, you can trade Bruce Brown for a very large contract that somebody wants to get off of with multiple years and take back like a ton of draft assets for it, right? Who knows? You might even lose your draft pick. And with the money that you save and losing that draft pick, you might be able to get another draft pick back by the contract that you can take back. You know what I mean? And now you have a draft pick next year. There is an advantage to getting that much further under the cap because you're not going to have too many opportunities to be under the cap. Because once Scotty's extension kicks in next summer, you have a max guy on your team. Once him, RJ, and Emmanuel Quickley are paid, because right now Scotty's not paid and Emmanuel Quickley's not paid. That's the only way you're under the cap right now. Once you have Jakob plus RJ plus Scotty plus Emmanuel paid up, that's your cap. Sad and depressing as it may be to say, that is your cap. So, so more than likely, you're not going to find that player at the top of this draft. And if the Raptors do end up with a top 4 pick, more than likely you're going to end up batting on a low lottery talent. And yeah, you'll feel happy about it. But personally, I'm just as fine if they don't get that pick. I'll be more excited if they get like a top 2 pick because I feel like maybe there's some player in this draft that is just like in that 6-7 range that the Raptors really like. And, you know, with their development staff, who knows? Maybe they can find that guy. Maybe they can find their Giannis in this draft. But, and I trust the Raptors scouting department because they usually do really well in these situations. But that being said, the idea of keeping the 6th pick, like standing pat at 6, is not appealing at all to me. Cody Williams or, you know, Zachary Risache, well, Risache maybe, but Cody Williams or, you know, one of these guys, like, I like some of these players a lot. Don't get me wrong. Like, when you start comparing them next to each other, you're like, this guy's better than this guy. This guy's better than this guy. La, 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 la. But then, like, I do the Scotty test or the Evan Mobley test. I would take Evan Mobley over every single player in this draft, like, eyes closed, wouldn't even look, right? And Evan Mobley had like 5 points last game, 2 points. I don't know what he had, but he really good defender, but he's not a franchise player. And I would take him over every player in this draft, eyes closed, wouldn't look, wouldn't even think about it. So it's like at some point, it's like, look, young players not helping you win. You need, like, you have a rare opportunity right here. And I'm going to tell you, like, what I think could happen and what I think I would love for it to happen. If the Raptors do not get this pick, like let's say it moves down, Spurs get it. Congratulations, you have surrendered the 7th overall pick, which will likely be used by the San Antonio Spurs on a player that is not going to impact winning as much as Jakob Poeltl for the next 3 years. Almost guarantee that. Okay, let's move on. Now you have that cap space back, and you have the 19th pick, and you have the 31st pick. You'll be able to take some swings on some sleuths. You know, if you're like scouting has done well this year and you've scouted well and someone falls, etc. It's a pretty good range for someone to fall. There's a ton of parity in this draft. The 19th pick in this draft is like a 19th pick in most drafts, just because it doesn't have star talent. The 19th and 31st pick will be really good value picks in this draft. The Raptors have 2 picks that are coming in, probably going to project to be role players within a couple of years, right? Maybe the first year they spend some time in the G League, kind of like what Grady did, back and forth, back and forth. I think there is a window to be bad next year. If the Raptors choose to be, there is a window to be bad. Maybe you take on a contract, an undesirable contract that nobody wants to touch, right? And you take that contract with like a multiple future picks and you give Bruce Brown, you know, and then that team waives them and they get off cap space and they get cap relief and you get another year to grow your young talent. You get another year to grow Grady Dick, another year to develop RJ, develop Scotty, and now next year you have 3 picks, right? In a great draft. And now you're like, wow, things are going really well. You know what I mean? So I think there's a way that this could be a blessing in disguise if the Raptors lose this pick. There's also a way that the Raptors can go the other way, which is you do get the pick. It is the top 3 or top 4 pick. You land the type of player that really fits your system. And then you go the other way because you won't have your pick next year. So now you do have to be really good because you definitely don't want to be giving up the 7th pick in next year's draft because that will be a freaking disaster. Next year's 7th overall pick would be like probably a 2nd overall pick in this draft. Like you really don't want to be maybe the 1st overall pick in this draft. You do not want to be giving that up. So that being said, this draft lottery dictates the Raptors offseason in so many ways. If you lose the pick, I think you do tank. I think you tank. I think you have an option to tank that is very appealing, you know? And it's going to be tough to sell Scotty on one more year of losing, but hey, tough. Them's the breaks, right? Do it for one more year. Lose competitively. No one's saying tank. No one is saying be the Detroit Pistons. Be competitive, but don't make any outlandishly stupid, you know, win now moves, right? To get over the top. Maybe look at explore, you know, trading Jakob Poeltl and, taking a flyer on a young big man who can grow into this. Maybe, play your 19th and 31st overall picks a lot and grow some chemistry between these guys, and then emerge the way the Orlando Magic have, right? Emerge the way the Oklahoma City Thunder have. However, if you lose this pick, now I think it changes your pick. If you get the pick, I do think it changes your projection a lot, because now you have all your young pieces. It may not have been the young piece you really wanted. It may not have been in the draft you wanted, but you have your young pieces. You have 4 lottery picks. RJ Barrett was the 3rd overall pick. Scotty Barnes the 4th overall pick. Grady's the 13th overall pick, and now you got a 3rd, 4th, 1st, 2nd, 6th overall pick. That's a lot of lottery talent. So now maybe your thinking is, okay, we trade Bruce Brown for players who can help us win. Like, we do take on contracts, maybe not the greatest contracts in the world, but they're contracts attached to people that help us win now. You have Kelly Olynyk already here. You don't look at trading Jakob Poeltl. You bring Jakob Poeltl back, and you start implementing, and then you try to be the Orlando Magic next year, and can the Raptors do that? Hell yes. I put their ceiling. Wolf Raider saying it's still top 6 protected next year. No, yes, it is top 6 protected next year. It is top 6 protected next year, and then in 2026 it becomes top 6. It's top 6 protected this year, next year, and the year after. If it does not convey by 2026, it becomes 2 second-round picks, I believe, the year after and after. So the Raptors, if the Raptors manage to tank for 3 years in a row, I mean, I don't think it's going to happen. But if they did manage to get back to back top 6 picks, the Spurs really, messed up, I guess. I don't know. I just don't see the Raptors being that patient and being that bad for that long. But nevertheless, I think there's a silver lining to both sides of it. But I am excited nonetheless. The Raptors are going to have an influx of young players come in. Unfortunately, they're going to be replacing a lot of young players that didn't work out. Jonte Porter, Christian Koloko, etc. But the Raptors, they thrive at this spot in the draft, 1931. This is where they do their magic. So let's see what they do this year. I have a feeling they're gonna find some gems. Need to remind you guys, like Jaime Jaquez, Brandon Pajimski, Trace Jackson Davis. These are the guys who went in this range, who were available in this range last year. Peyton Watson, right? Guys who play minutes, right? Julian Strawther last year. Nikola Jovic, who started for the Heat. Like, I mean, there's real talent with that 19th pick. Real talent, like real rotation talent, coming into a system that develops well. So I'm excited about the 19th pick and the 31st pick. I'm very excited. And I will return to draft coverage and mock drafts and all that stuff and draft analysis once the Raptors either, get their pick or lose their pick. I fully, by the way, just for the record, I'm expecting them to lose their pick. However, if they keep their pick, then we can do some video breakdowns on Zachary Reese-Sachet and Nikola Topic and guys like that. However, until they do that, it just feels wrong and premature to talk about that stuff. You've talked me into hoping it conveys. I mean, I'm not really saying I'm hoping it conveys. I'm just saying I'm perfectly neutral on either outcome. Like, unless they love someone at the top of this draft and they end up getting the top pick, like I think getting the 6th pick in this draft, like next year, what's the best case scenario? Worst case scenario, really. Worst case scenario is you get the number 1 pick next year and you get Cooper Flag, right? And in which case, either way, you're keeping that pick. However, realistically, if you convey the pick this year, maybe getting the 16th or 15th pick next year, if you make the play-in, playoffs, whatever, 13, 14, 15, 16 next year is a pretty good place to find a starter level player. The difference is you will pay that player like a 15th, 16th pick. There's a really, really, really big salary gap between the 15th pick and the 3rd pick. And when you start talking about navigating under the cap, navigating under the tax line, it makes a difference. I mean, a guy like James Wiseman, guys like Marvin Bagley, yeah, it sucks that you miss on a player like that. But when you talk about like the real value being brought to you by a first overall pick or a second overall pick, typically it's a discount deal because usually those players are like Victor Wembanyama and Shaquille O'Neal. I want to say usually they are. In rare cases, they are that type. Okay. But sometimes they're like Cade Cunningham and James Wiseman, in which case you're not really getting value on that player. Like you're paying them millions of dollars per win, right? Whereas there are teams like the Miami Heat that are getting that same value in second rounders. So I'm just saying, like it is a value proposition to some extent, and timing is everything in life. Anyways, so yeah, moving on. Let's just rapid fire this. Bucks, Suns, Clippers, hopeless. You know, aging stars. This whole concept of trying to revive something. I'm not sure any of these teams necessarily have a direction or know where the hell they're going. But I will say this. I'm not scared of any of these teams going forward. I think their window has officially closed. I'm not really sure Giannis, Brook Lopez, Chris Middleton, Damian Lillard. I don't think this trio, this trio plus Brook, I don't think they're going to be back together. I think they have to make a change. I'm not necessarily sure Dame is like the type of player. I'm not sure Giannis is the type of player anymore, honestly. I don't know what I'm trying to say here. I just don't think that foursome, even if healthy, is good enough to win a championship. I think part of that has to do with health, the health of Dame, the health of Giannis, the age of Brook Lopez. So I look at teams like Philly. It's back to back years that Joel Embiid has dealt with something. Durability is coming down to that, right? Kawhi Leonard, health, right? We are in an NBA right now where Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, all of them are gone. Steph Curry, Draymond Green, bouncing the play-in. This is a new NBA. Jeez, what am I saying? Quartet. Yes. My brain is not working right now. I said quadro. Yes, quartet. Of course, like a barbershop quartet or a strings quartet. Yes, of course. So we're in a new NBA. Jalen Brunson. This is the new NBA, right? Jalen Brunson and the Knicks is a staple of the new NBA, and they're going to be around for a very long time, especially if OG resigns. Tyrese Halliburton and the Indiana Pacers. This is the new NBA, right? Anthony Edwards and the Minnesota Timberwolves. This is a new NBA. So these dying dinosaurs, I think there's going to be a very, very prolonged death of these teams because they are so deprived of cap space and draft assets. So we could see like 5 years in the lottery once some of these teams are done. You can also tack in teams like Chicago to this. So the Raptors will have a unique opportunity to at least come up in a league where a lot of teams will be going down. A lot of stars will be aging out. The Raptors are on the right side of the timeline now. There's a realistic expectation that Emmanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett, and Scotty Barnes will be much better players next year. And that'll help. I think that those guys played this year as much as they were expected to. I think you're probably a 33-win team. So if a better version of those guys play together and get more familiar with each other, I really don't think 40 wins is that far off. But I also think this league is in a weird place where all these young teams are good suddenly, and all of these aging teams aren't quite bad enough yet. So like it's like everybody's really good right now, but that will not remain the case because teams like the Bucks, teams like the Bulls, teams like the Heat, teams like the Clippers, teams like the Suns, I fear these teams are going to go downhill. And as they go downhill, as these stars age out, as these stars become, shadows of themselves, What's the future in, Golden State? Klay Thompson, washed, right? Like I use the word washed like carefully. Washed. Draymond Green, like not quite there anymore, right? Um, will Memphis ever recover? Like will they recover? Will John Morant find his form and that young core? Will they ascend? Houston Rockets, would their young core ascend? What's going on with Atlanta, right? There's a lot of teams where I'm just like, man, they could be so much worse next year. And given, the draft compensation and the draft element of tanking next year and the year after, I do suspect that a lot of teams will decide to tank next year, which goes into my thought of, would it be wise for the Raptors, if they do keep this pick, to become buyers right now? To just say, okay, we can play out the natural course of things, but Emmanuel Quickley is not 20 years old. He is going on 25. So he's pretty ready. Scotty Barnes is, he's a third year player going into his fourth year. If he's getting there, like, we don't have to act like Scotty Barnes is a rookie anymore. Like, he's ready to win now, right? You need to get those playoff reps. So with so many teams staring down years of irrelevance, wouldn't it be a nice time to have some draft picks? Sure. But if an offer comes along where you can get Bruce Brown to take on like a player like Bradley Beal, do you do it? Like, obviously not Bradley Beal, but what about a CJ McCollum? Would you do it? Would you do it for the upgrade? Would you do it on the upgrade? Like, if New Orleans just looks at that team and they're just like, shit, there's no way we can continue to pay these players. I'm sorry, there's a lot of teams that are going to have to sell. There are a lot of teams that are not going to be able to sign guys. This is the CBA. The new CBA is constructed this way. It is going to be hard for the Sacramento Kings to keep Malik Monk. The Raptors have cap space at the perfect time. The perfect time. What they decide to do with it, I don't know. Will they suffer because they're Toronto? I don't know. But I do think, like, I'm thinking like the Raptors did their homework on how the CBA was going to impact other teams, what their threshold and pain thresholds would be to exceed, the luxury tax payments. And sure, there are some owners like Matt Ishbia that are just like, I don't give a shit, whatever, pay whatever, Steve Ballmer, I don't care, whatever. But at some point, those repeater tax payments, those restrictions, those, everything that's in the new CBA, but the freezing of the picks and all that stuff, those restrictions are going to become more and more taxing to team building. And those teams are going to have to be staring down the fact that these stars like Kevin Durant and Kawhi Leonard are on teams where you cannot get them help because you're just capped out. At which point, if there are assets to be had on these teams, they will need to unload those assets in order to get help for those stars. So it's an interesting time to look at teams like this as aging dinosaurs, sure, but also consider what the Brooklyn Nets would have asked the Toronto Raptors for in a Kevin Durant trade. I'm sure the Raptors know because they were exploring trades for Kevin Durant, 2 years ago. The asking price was Scotty Barnes. I assure you today, if the Suns decide to sell on Kevin Durant, the asking price is no longer Scotty Barnes. It might be Grady Dick, Emmanuel Quickley, and a few first-round picks. That is a far cry from an unreasonable haul, or maybe it's not even that. I'm not sure what a guy like, but I am telling you that at some point, these teams are going to have to get off these guys. And at that point, I think it'll be very interesting if the Raptors are close, if they can get their next guy. Another team that should be looking at those, potential stars that become available is the Orlando Magic. Now, the Orlando Magic go into Cleveland to face off in Game 7 tomorrow, and I have no expectation that they're going to win because I think they struggle so much offensively, and I think at home it will be very, very difficult for Cleveland to lose that game. However, I will say that it becomes really difficult for me to see a situation in which Orlando makes it through with this core going forward. Like, I think they need something else. I'm not really sure Paolo and Franz and Jalen Suggs. Like, I think they have too much of a good thing. So I would love to see a player like, and it might just mess everything up. I was going to say Zach LaVine, but like a player like Zach LaVine, maybe a CJ McCollum, maybe someone like that, where you just balance out some of this defense with a little bit of shot making and creativity, right? Because they just keep drafting these guys over and over and over again. Like they drafted Anthony Black last year, right? It's another guy who does a lot of the same stuff that Jonathan Isaac and all these guys do, but it's like at some point you're going to need somebody who generates offense a little bit more efficiently than Paolo. So I'm very curious to see what they do, but I'm also very curious to see if the Raptors do something different as well. Anyways, move on from this. What is the Raptors type? I gotta tell you, I was listening to a podcast the other day. So, I took 9, 10, 11 days off podcasting, largely to, I don't know, like do stuff, other stuff, like cook. I was cooking a lot. Made some N64 retro boxes. You want to see something? Hold on. I made a box. I made a box for my Zelda, Majora's Mask thing. It's pretty cool. Making boxes is fun. It's therapeutic and a really interesting learning experience. But nevertheless, Tariq says, "Do you still have a PS2?" I do. I do have a PS2, a PS3, a PS4, a PS5. That's such a waste. An Xbox 360, a Dreamcast, a regular Xbox, a GameCube, and my N64. So that's 8 systems. And I'm not really a gamer. But anyways, so I was making some boxes. But I was listening to some podcasts, and there's a podcast discussing like who the Raptors might trade for, and this name James Wiseman came up, and Andrew Wiggins came up and stuff. And Andrew Wiggins I could at least sort of see, especially if it's like a salary dump and a rehab situation, whatever. I could at least see that. But when it comes to guys like James Wiseman, Ben Simmons, guys of that ilk, I really don't think the Raptors would risk bringing in a player with that baggage. And that's not to say James Wiseman is a character problem or whatever, but James Wiseman would be on his third team and he's like barely off his rookie contract. That is a red flag if ever there was one, right? That's not to say he's a bad guy. You know what I mean? I've never watched James Wiseman play and thought that guy's really that guy's going to be a part of a winning program someday. I think the Raptors want guys who are going to be part of winning programs. Guys who bring winning. That's why they liked Grady Dick. I think that's why I like Scotty Barnes. I think that's why I like, Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett, right? I think that's why they brought in Jakob Poeltl and Kelly Olynyk. I think that's who they like. That's their type. So their type is a guy who wins, a guy who has winning habits, a guy who plays winning basketball, a guy who plays team first basketball. If they do keep their top 6 pick, I wouldn't be too surprised to see them looking at a UConn player, Even with their second round pick, I wouldn't be surprised to look, maybe they're undrafted heap. They wouldn't be looking at some UConn players. There's some really good players on that team. And I think all 3 guys who are draft eligible on that team would be really interesting to look at for the Raptors, precisely because they play winning basketball and precisely because they've gone through that program. And I just know that the fact that they went through that program means that they were vetted by a coach who does not tolerate players who have losing habits. And so I think that will play very highly in the Raptors, so I think like when you start looking at Leonard Hamilton, in Florida State, you start talking about guys who like go to your Florida State. It's a type, it's a type. Like there's a type of player that guys, these college coaches and college programs recruit consistently. There's a type of player who's drawn to that system defensively, offensively. There's a synergy between how they play in college and the type of basketball they learn versus the type of players you're trying to put into your system. And so I really think like it'd be very hard for me to believe that the Raptors are going to be importing a lot of talent from places like Detroit and Washington. Very hard to believe. Very quickly, Bilal Koulibaly had a very interesting French interview in which he was asked who is the most overrated player in the NBA, and I released a reel about this in which he said Pascal Siakam, and a lot of people got like upset with it, and I'm not upset by it. I actually agree with him completely, and I think like there's obviously there's a couple of other answers I can give to that. Zach LaVine is up there for me as most overrated. Bradley Beal, Pascal Siakam, Julius Randle, basically this type of player. But yeah, he basically pointed it out and he said, he's just very predictable. I found his moves to be really predictable, and I thought that was interesting. I thought that was interesting of him to say. So yeah, so in terms of what's a Raptors type, I think it's a winning player. So it's a bit of a cop out, but I think that is the type of player they will target. Edie and Bronny. It could be a TV show. So I'm coming around a little bit on Zach Edey. I'm watching a lot more tape of him, and I'm starting to see ways in which he could be a successful NBA player for 10 minutes a night. Partially because of his rolling gravity and his screen setting and his potential to develop a jump shot. He's just not a guy that you're going to be able to bump off his spots too easily. Now, defensively, you're going to have to do a lot of work to hide him, but means good thing the Raptors have like all of these, athletic, twitchy wings around, like Scotty Barnes and Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett, etc. So you're still just, funneling, all these players into a 7'4" guy in the paint with his arms stretched out. It's not the worst thing in the world. Obviously, in the playoffs, it's going to be something that'll probably get you played off the floor. And I'm certainly not advocating, devoting a first round pick to him or anything like that. I'm not suggesting take him top 6 or take him 19th, but I can see ways in which having a player like that on your roster could be useful. Someone is going to draft him in the top 30. That was in doubt maybe before the NCAA tournament. It is not in doubt now. So if he's sitting there at 31, I can think of worse ways to use the 31st overall pick than Zach Edey. That being said, Christian Koloko was the 33rd overall pick, and I think Christian Koloko is a way better prospect than Zach Edey. So that being said, maybe I wouldn't take Zach Edey with 31st overall pick. What I am trying to say is that I can see a way in which Zach Edey could be an impactful 10-minute a night role player. Because I'm watching the playoffs right now, and yeah, there's a part of me that's just like, man, if that guy was on the floor, like the teams would just blitz the pace and they would just like run him off the court and they would put him in, high pick and roll and just blow past him, right? Like you're seeing guys like Nikola Jokic who are slow-footed, but not nearly as slow-footed as Zach Edey, struggle. So yeah, there's going to be certain matchups where he's going to be completely unplayable, and I don't think that's going to change ever. But there's also going to be certain matchups where the other team won't have anybody to do anything with him. And we're seeing teams like the Knicks with Mitchell Robinson and Isaiah Hartenstein, and they're just bigger. They were keeping Joel Embiid off the glass, and now you're seeing, Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert just keeping Nikola Jokic off the glass. And there's a value to that because I guarantee you if Nikola Jokic gets 20 rebounds today, the Nuggets win. So there's going to be certain matchups in which it's useful to have a player like that. And with the expanded roster of 18 players, could you afford to keep Zach Edey on a 2-way contract? Yes, you could. Is that worth 31st overall pick given his status as a prospect, plus the homegrown nature, plus the lack of talent in this draft? Maybe. I'm not pushing for it. I'm just saying he's possible. In terms of Bronny James, a lot has been said about his analytics, but I think not enough has been said about the type of high school player he was. And I'm not really sure if he goes back to USC. But I think part of his struggles this year has to do with that system, their coach, the players around him, and also his heart surgery or his heart attack. Sorry, not heart surgery, but his heart attack that he had. And might that scare some teams off, that a player at 24 has had a heart attack? Like, is there something that needs to be explored there? If his medicals are clear, this might be the type of player that you look at in an undrafted heap if he does go undrafted. And again, both cases, I'm saying the Raptors could look at Zach Edey at 31, but they probably shouldn't. So that's a little bit wishy-washy. And I'm saying Bronny James is definitely going to get drafted, but if he doesn't get drafted, the Raptors should give him a look in the undrafted heap. The reason I say this is because he is a really smart playmaker, and he is a really, really interesting athlete as a defender. I suspect that he's going to measure a lot shorter than the 6'3-ish, 6'4" that he's been listed as. Because he's been listed as 6'4", and I have always suspected he's closer to 6'1". If he's 6'1" with like a sort of average wingspan, I have to take this back. And I just think there's no future for him in the NBA. But if he's close to like 6'2.5", 6'3", and he measured in like a 6'5", 6'6" wingspan, his athleticism functionally as a defender is very interesting and could be the type of thing that the Raptors develop into their own version of a Jalen Suggs, right? Like a really shitty version of Jalen Suggs, but he has a lot of the Jalen Suggs qualities, right? So as an undrafted player, certainly there are worse options than Bronny James. Plus, he's a pretty hype prospect. Maybe it helps sell some tickets, given that the Raptors have decided that they are going to gouge fans again. Okay, so in terms of what I had scheduled to talk about, that's pretty much it. I do want to give this channel and this community a big thanks for sticking with me through my little hiatus here. It wasn't very scheduled, but I got to tell you, like about like 8 days ago, I wanted to go live, and I was just like, I don't have anything to say. I don't have anything interesting to say. I don't have anything overly insightful to say about this series or what's about to happen. So I was just like, meh, I don't know. So yeah, I guess that's that. I didn't really have anything too interesting to say, and so I didn't do a live, and then it just kind of carried forward. And then this room was a bit of a mess because I'm sort of setting up my game wall over there, and the games were all over the place. And every single time I look in this little studio that I had set up, there was always stuff piled up over the thing. But I've been watching, and I've been, looking up draft prospects and stuff. So it's been interesting to take a little bit of a break. And in the wake of my break, I just kept looking, and every single day the channel views were exploding and exploding because of that Nikola Jokic reel that we made last year. So a video that keeps on giving, which is really cool. And we are edging really close to 10,000 subscribers. And I would not be surprised with how that reel is growing, that in 2-3 days we hit 10,000 subscribers. And that was a really big goal for me. My goal for this year was 20,000 subscribers. I don't really care how I get it other than, contests and stuff like that. But it'd be really cool to get it that way because obviously there's a lot of content planned for this year. There's, draft content. There's going to be free agent content. There's going to be, training camp. There's going to be so much stuff, preseason, summer league. That's more than fair. Breaks are good. I think he'll be back for OG versus Pascal. Yes. So speaking of OG versus Pascal, there will be a post game after every single Indiana New York game. It'll probably be after, if there's a Western Conference game right after that game, it'll probably be after that, and we'll talk about both games. I think it'll be very relevant for Raptor fans. I'm pretty sure this community is more pro OG than Pascal, because if you're pro Pascal, I probably blocked you at some point. But there will be no shade on Pascal. I genuinely want the guy to succeed. I wanted him off the team, but it's just the same thing with Fred. Once they're gone, once they're off the team, water under the bridge, we just move on, they're not on the team anymore, and we just celebrate the good times, and I don't really give a shit anymore. That being said, I am fully 1000% rooting for OG Anunoby in this series, even though I find Knicks fans so annoying sometimes. But yeah, Indiana fans, y'all been really fucking annoying too. Like Indiana fans, they got to the finals with that midseason tournament, and like they became the most annoying fan base on the internet for like 3 months. Like they think everything they have is like the best. They think they're title contenders, and I just want them to get humbled. And frankly, I think they're going to get smacked. So it'll be interesting to watch that. I think Rick Carlisle is a really good coach. Personally, like if you asked me 3 years ago, Rick Carlisle or Tom Thibodeau, I think Rick Carlisle is a better coach. But Tom Thibodeau just coached circles around Nick Nurse in the previous series, and I was not excited by what I saw from the Indiana Pacers. So I wonder, I wonder, this Knicks team is just, man, they're inspiring. Like they're a really good basketball team. Dante DiVincenzo, Josh Hart, Deuce McBride, like the number of guards and just the number of scrappy, all out defenders that they throw at you, and then the size inside, and they've got just enough shot making. And with their paper thin defense, like everybody's going to be a scorer on New York against Indiana, right? Like you're gonna have guys like Deuce McBride, and he's gonna be able to put up shots. Josh Hart is gonna get offensive rebounds all day because Pascal Siakam doesn't box out. Like I'm very, very curious to see how things hold up, right? Wolf Raider saying future cast, I'd like to hear if Quick will be even half the player of Maxey. I think he will be, yeah. Do you think Brunson is a superstar? I do not. Magic or Cavs tomorrow? Cavs. Any more questions, or we're going to end it here? Anyways, thank you to the 150-ish of you who have come on to this live. Sucks if you're a Leafs fan. Sucks that they lost. OG looks very happy in the Knicks, smiling and jovial. Think he may actually stay. He might. Yeah. I mean, I got to tell you, like my initial hypothesis was largely due to the fact that he and Scotty are so close. And personally, I just wanted to troll Knicks fans because they were talking so much shit about how they won the trade. I still don't think they won the trade. OG was freaking phenomenal, though. OG stopping Joel Embiid was amazing. But OG, every single time, like the number of times that OG and Anunoby like just screwed up offensively was crazy. In this league, you cannot pay $45 million, $42 million, $40 million for a defensive specialist who is not like generational defensively. OG is not generational defensively. He has been a very vital part. He has not been $40 million worth. He has been at least $25 million worth, sure. And if he was willing to stick around for $25 million as a fourth option, I think, Raptor fans would have been like the best deal in the book, right? I was listening to my honest trailer from last year. I didn't say one bad thing about OG or Scotty at all. Like I obviously love those guys, and I'm rooting for OG always. But yeah, $40 million is a tough sell. Now, if he takes 30, I think the NBA should do an investigation because I think Philly will be willing to offer 40. I think there's a lot of teams out there to be willing to offer, the full max for OG given what they're seeing him do. He's just a floor raiser. Like he's a ceiling raiser for any team that has a couple of stars. Like how good, like, I mean, if Phoenix had him instead of Bradley Beal, like it changes everything. It changes everything. You take one of the worst defenders in the NBA and you put one of the best defenders in the NBA who's just so low maintenance and he does so many great things for you. He's so versatile. So yeah, so I think, but yes, I also believe that he may stay. I always believed he may stay. I always felt like the Raptors had like a 5% to 10% chance of getting him. I think that shrank. But yes. Magic versus Raps next year in the playoffs. I want to see Scotty show the world that he's way better than Paolo. He will. Anyways, guys, have a great one. Nice to come back to the lives. And thank you again for getting us past 9,000 subscribers. That was a really welcome surprise. When I looked, it was like 9,040. And I was like, whoa, that's so cool. And then I looked again, it was like 9,200. I was like, what? Very cool. It takes a lot of channels, like many, many, many years to get to this point. So the fact that you guys have brought us here so quickly is very nice. And I really appreciate it. And hopefully 10,000 soon, hopefully 20,000 soon, hopefully 50,000 soon. I will tell you though, not to get boundlessly ambitious, my goal for the end of the year was 20,000. So we have 7 months to go and 10,700-ish subscribers to go. So that's not too ambitious. It's pretty ambitious, but yeah. All right. Talk to y'all later. And have a good night.